I'm a big fan of trying to keep things as simple as possible. This can be overwhelming information. And I'm also a big fan of not recreating things that are excellent that are out there anyway. So the handout, if you could pass that back, Lisa.
Oh, yeah.
This is from the National Center on Disability and Education, I think is the full name of it, NCDAE. They have a project called the Goals Project that a number of Oregon universities participate in. That's really focused on trying to make communications accessible, web accessibility, IT accessibility processes. So they've put together a lot of cheat sheets. This is one of them that I think is pretty excellent and pretty easy to use. It doesn't get into the depth of content that we could get into. I talk about this topic a lot on campus, and I actually have talked with this group before, maybe 2010 or 2011, right after I started here, about this topic too. And when I teach this as a standalone class, I take about 2 hours to get through all the content. But over time, I realized that's a pretty overwhelming amount of content. So I'm going to try to keep it to just a couple of simple topics, or simpler topics, and then if delve into any questions you might have. And one of the reasons to have it in this room is so you could open your websites and follow along, use one of the tools that I'm going to show you that's also on this handout on your own sites, and then hopefully have a lot of time to come around and talk or answer any specific questions you might have on what you're seeing on your own sites as well. So I'll start with some just overviews for the course and what we're going to talk about briefly, spending some time talking more big picture why accessibility is important and what it is, what it's about, before we get into specifically web accessibility topics. So I talk about web accessibility from really three broad frameworks. One is an ethical sense that we really should be providing access to our communications and to our technology. People with disabilities are a growing population in this country. As of the last census, about 20% of the US population has a disability. I could get even more specific about folks that have visual disabilities or mobility disabilities, but generally that's 1 in 5 individuals. In Oregon State, Disability Access Services serves about 1,000 students on campus, so roughly 3% of the student body is registered with that office as having a disability. We don't have an accurate number of the employees with disabilities on campus because that wasn't something we were allowed to capture until last year when there were some regulations created that allow us to do that now and actually ask us to do that. So we're going to start to get some numbers on that. From the legal sense, there's already a lot that's talked about legally about how web accessibility applies to us through the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. This clause that I put in here is straight from the ADA, that communications with people with disabilities must be as effective as communications with non-disabled persons. So that's generally been the clause that's been used whenever someone wants to file a complaint with a higher education institution or a public business or something that their websites are not accessible. And from a business sense, well, it is a large percentage of the population, but we're all using technology. We use it for almost everything we do, from buying tickets and signing up for things to emailing back and forth. So it's a necessity that folks be able to use it and interact with society through technology. So we do have an IT accessibility policy if you're not aware of that. It's on a website I maintain, oregonstate.edu/accessibility. And that's where all of the disability-related university policies and standards are housed. And there's a bunch of information on web accessibility on that site that I'm not going to get into today. So that policy was implemented in 2012, and technically it requires that we follow a standard called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 Level AA, which is very technical. But it is the standard that the federal government has been talking about building into the ADA. So eventually the Department of Justice is going to revise the ADA regulations to include IT accessibility, very specifically technical standards. There are technical standards for lots of things in the ADA, such as how big a door can be or how much space there needs to be around a computer desk so that someone who's a chair user can use it. So they're going to be doing that for websites and for IT within the next few years as well. So trying to break down the population that we're talking about into 4 broad categories, not perfect categories, but to think about it, this is one way to organize information. Most folks, when they think about web accessibility, people who are blind come to mind, people with visual disabilities. But certainly this topic affects a lot more individuals than just folks who are blind. But I'll start with that group, folks who are blind, low vision, maybe folks who have a difficulty seeing contrast or color blindness falls into this category. A lot of these individuals use what are called screen readers. I'm going to demonstrate some of those to interact with technology. And a screen reader is a piece of software that translates the text to speech on a website or on a document or whatnot. There's a few big ones. JAWS is the biggest that's used. It's used by 85 to 90% of the blind community to interact with technology. And it's a PC-only screen reader. It's really expensive. It's like $1,200 to buy it. So it's not something that we have all over the place on campus, although a lot of our computer labs do have it built into their standard software arrangements. And then VoiceOver is the product that's on Apple products. It's built into every laptop, every iPhone, iPad that they build. VoiceOver is embedded. So it's actually picking up quite a bit of market share and has been for a number of years because it's built in. So you just get it when you buy the technology versus having to buy a standalone piece of equipment. There's another free PC screen reader that's open source that I use a lot to do testing. It's called NVDA, and it's freely available. You can download it and use it as a piece of software on any PC computer. And it's useful too. So other things such as magnifiers are actually devices that sit on a desktop. You put a paper or something on it and it'll actually magnify the text very large. Or that's actually built into computers a lot now too, even greater magnification of software that'll more greatly magnify things than browsers can or other built-in technology. Very high levels of magnification. Speech recognition has become increasingly important too. Things like Siri on Apple devices, that's a form of speech recognition that was actually created for people with disabilities to use that has become now more mainstream that we all use. So folks with mobility disabilities, if you think of maybe someone that has limited dexterity or maybe someone that doesn't have the use of their hands or doesn't have hands, a lot of those individuals don't use a mouse to interact with the computer. So then how do you interact with technology otherwise? And it's all through the keyboard. And so some folks use head sticks or mouth wands to type on a computer or other forms of speech recognition or other software that can be used to interact with a keyboard instead of using a mouse. That's actually something that I'll talk about it a little bit later too, but if you want to do a very simple test for accessibility on your site, the easiest thing to do is to set aside your mouse or unplug it and just try to use your keyboard and see if you can tell where you're at on the page. And if you can interact with everything on your page, then you have some level of accessibility. If you're missing things or you don't see where you're at, then there may be some problems. And I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. Folks with hearing disabilities, really, we're talking about captioning media and transcripts where we need to. Folks with cognitive or mental disabilities, maybe folks with learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, other folks fall into this category. It's really important, the content and how you arrange content. This is an area where I talk about the benefit of using something like Drupal. I assume most of Student Affairs, if not all of Student Affairs, uses Drupal now. Do you all use Drupal? Yeah. So something like a content management system is great because it's always the layout of your site is always consistent from a content standpoint. So from page to page within one department or one office's site, it's going to be consistent except for that main body content. So that makes it very understandable for someone who may have a learning disability or something where having to visually search for information over and over again can be hard to do. So consistency is important. From a consistency standpoint, it would be best if the entire university used a very similar template, but of course that would then make everything look the same. And that's something that has to be weighed when we make these decisions. So I want to show you a few screen readers and how they work. The first one I'll show VoiceOver. and I'll actually show a video of VoiceOver. This is the old homepage. I took one yesterday with the new homepage that I'll show. I like VoiceOver personally because it has a visual component to it. So sometimes the audio can be hard to understand, but this actually has a little caption bar at the bottom that you can turn on, and it'll actually have a transcript of what the screen reader is saying. And there'll actually be a little focus indicator box that'll follow along with where the screen reader is reading on the page. So I used this on the accessibility website, just to give you an idea. The audio's not turning on. It was working fine a few minutes ago.
Maps, link, online services, link, image, Orchestration Foundation, link, make a gift, selection replaced.
I'll just use my computer.
Welcome to VoiceOver. VoiceOver speaks description.
So I just turned it on.
VoiceOver on QuickTime Player, screen selector, window, visit, link, image, Oregon State University, visit, link, image, Oregon State University, link, calendar, link, library, link, maps, link, online services, link, image, Orchestration Foundation, link, make a gift, selection replaced, pages, accessibility, radio button, 1 of, visit, link, heading level 1, visit, link, accessibility, heading level 2, descriptive links, heading level 3, introduction. The purpose of descriptive links is to provide users with the proper context of where clicking the link will take them. Screen reader users often navigate websites going from link to link, using the tab key or shift tab to go backwards, so providing links that make sense is vitally important and necessary. There are 2 main concepts to consider with descriptive links: internal link, providing link text, and internal link, screen reader behavior. Heading level 3, WCAG 2.0.
So I'll stop there. That gives you somewhat of an idea of how a screen reader works. The voices can be changed on a lot of these. This is one of the better voices, in my opinion, on the VoiceOver product. But a few things that are important. Most screen readers, every screen reader that I know of, announces the elements before it talks about them. So right here you see that it actually says heading level 3, because this is identified as a heading in the HTML in the code for the page. So it'll actually say that. When it's about to read an image, the screen reader, depending on the screen reader, will say something like image, photo, graphic, and then read the alternative text of the image after that. So it gives context for the page. The way that most people that use screen readers navigate is not like this, not just listening to the whole page. You actually interact with the page, so you can use tab keys, as it was reading here, to go from link to link. Becoming more common is to navigate by headings, because headings actually provide good structure. So you could go from heading to heading to heading down the page to find exactly the section that you're looking for, and then listen to the content within that heading section. I'll give you a demonstration of that. So here is
controlling the speed? Were you controlling the speed of how quickly
yes,
people? Okay.
That was actually just the 50% speed. That is a good point. Thank you too. So that may have been understandable. That may not have been for you. Most folks who are proficient screen reader users use it to a speed that most of us would not understand or recognize, because you've become attuned to listening to something so quickly. So if you went and you searched on YouTube for screen reader demonstration videos with people with disabilities demonstrating them, the audio goes so fast you can get through a page within a minute or two pretty quickly. And yeah, you won't be able to pick up any of the words. It's pretty fascinating to watch some of that. And there's lots of nuance into how screen readers work and keyboard shortcuts to learn to be able to navigate a lot more quickly through a site. It's actually, if you do have an Apple product, VoiceOver has a learning module to help teach you how to use VoiceOver. So if you turn on VoiceOver, that's the first thing that's provided. So you can spend 10, 15 minutes trying to figure out how to use it yourself. So if I'm on this website here, this is the accessibility website, and I start using the tab key. Oh, I don't have it active on here. Let me go to Firefox. So you can see I'm using the tab key, and I'm going through and the links are being highlighted. So I could tell where I'm at using a keyboard only, and if I use Shift Tab, I go back a link at a time. So that's how a lot of folks navigate, and then if you're a screen reader user, you hear link, linked image, link decorative image, link complex, and so on and so forth. It just reads that text for someone. So that's how it generally works. So the next example, I took a video using NVDA screen reader, and this is the current homepage. And the voice is a little bit different, and it doesn't have a visual component, so this isn't a video.
Oregon State University and landmark button. Visited link graphic. Oregon State University menu expanded menu item. Visited link about menu item. Visited link academics menu item. Visited link research menu item. Visited link athletics menu item. Visited link extension and outreach item menu. Heading level 1 Oregon State University. Search for people and pages. Edit as autocomplete button. Looking for a person. Visited link try the campus directory dot button. Exit search. Heading level 2 featured stories list button. Previous button. Next. Visited link menu expanded tools and services item menu. Menu expanded menu item. Visit.
It's a little bit harder. That's a little faster too. I could have turned that a little bit down. But you could hear things that said button previous, button next, so it was actually saying next story or previous story. It was reading these buttons. And it also identifies, screen readers identify things like how many items are in a list. So for the top hat here with the main links, it's a list of 5 items. So a screen reader gives that context for some of these elements. And it also reads, it's a good demonstration here. It reads the content behind the page. It actually reads the code. It doesn't read the visual part of the page. So things like the search box, if I go to the OSU homepage. So this search box here is on the page. It's embedded in the code, but it's hidden unless you click the magnifying glass here. But the screen reader read this. So that someone could still know this is a search box here, and I don't have to expand this necessarily to search within it. So I did a demonstration yesterday where I turned on NVDA and just let it read the whole page from start to finish using that speed. And it took 4 minutes to go through the whole homepage from the top to the bottom. I do that every once in a while just to kind of benchmark for Central Web Services and for our interactive communications folks. And a few years ago with our old format of the website, it took 11 minutes to get through the page. And so when you're reading every link on a page and all the underlying content, you can see how much content they removed from the homepage and how many links they removed. And how overwhelming that can be if you're a screen reader user just looking for one thing on a site to have to figure out how to navigate through all of that. So the homepage now has 65 links on it, depending on how many stories there are, how many news items. It used to have 150 or so, and a lot of them used to be redundant. They would provide the same link in like 2 or 3 different places. And so that can make it more complex to navigate a site for folks too, just to having a lot of redundant content, having a lot of content in multiple places. Things like the news and the calendar sites or sections on most of our sites, the images used to be links to the story, the story title used to be links to the story, and then there would be a third link saying read more or something. So you're providing 3 links to the exact same website then that someone has to listen to in a row to navigate. So I can't say that that's inaccessible because it is still accessible, but it certainly is not ease of use. It's too much redundancy built in. So there's ways to change that, and now there's only 1 link for every story on these sites. And part of it is changing behavior, society's behavior, and interacting with technology too, whereas the comment years ago used to be, you have to provide multiple links because folks won't know that that's a link to click on and to go to that story. So as we start to shift folks' understanding and interaction with technology through trying to do some of these means, the better, in my view. So all of this information is provided on the accessibility website as well. If you go to the OSU accessibility website, But there's lots of tools that can help you check for accessibility. And the one I'm going to demonstrate that's also on this handout is Wave by WebAIM. Have any of you heard of that before? It's a free tool that you can use from WebAIM, which is Web Accessibility in Mind. It's a organization out of Utah State University that focuses on web accessibility. Probably the best known, most well-respected organization, certainly in the country, if not the world, to focus on these issues. So I'm going to demonstrate this. So there's a couple of ways that you can use Wave. You can go to their website, wave.webaim.org, and input a URL, and then it'll provide, I'll just do it for this site, and it'll provide you a summary of accessibility here. And what it'll do is it'll actually give you kind of this summary of errors, alerts, features. It's kind of red is bad, yellow is unsure, green is good, blue is, those are structured things, those are usually good things as well. And it'll give you details. And I like that it embeds icons on the page, so it's easier to understand without having to understand the code behind the site. And so when you hover over one of these icons, it'll actually identify what it's referencing. So it's saying that content is a heading level 3, or alternative text for images is a heading level 2. And it'll actually do things like it'll show you what the alt text is. So I obviously need to change this website. But so here it'll say the alt text for the image of Larry is Vice Provost for Student Affairs, Larry Roper. So you don't have to look at the code to understand what that would be, which is useful. And if you click on this flag icon here, it's more information. It'll actually show you a list of all the icons, and then you can actually hover over and click on them. And these are all errors, or it's saying that these are errors, and these are actually things that I need to work with interactive communications about because they're template issues. These are all things that changed when they changed to a mobile site. So when I click on these links, you can't actually see them. It doesn't take you to that page because it's all hidden in the background. But when you click on most of these links, it'll actually take you to where it is and then do a quick highlight for when it's on. And so this is a pretty easy way to go through your site and check what some of these items are. So basically anything that's red are things that need to be addressed. But there are things that, of course, being a Drupal user, are template issues versus your content issues. And so I like showing tools like this because the more of us that can push on the templates needing to be addressed, the easier it is to get that done sometimes if a lot of us are experiencing the same issues. Another thing you can do here is you can actually show it without any style. So it takes your page and takes out all of the visual coding and just leaves all the text in here. And this is useful because it'll actually then show you all the icons too. So I can actually find these. They're all down at the bottom. They're all links that are shown on the mobile version of the site that are not shown on the full version of the site. But this will actually show you all the alt text too and all the other images. So it's really useful. And there's other things on here too, like this link shows you an outline using the heading structure, and so you can look at your heading structure and determine, is my heading structure appropriate, without actually having to look at the code or look at your page and try to determine what is a heading. So it works the exact same as an add-on, or here in Chrome it's an extension, and I have a little icon here on the upper right for Wave, and when I click that icon it does the exact same thing. It provides me all that information. The extension is useful because it works on password protected sites, so you can actually use it behind firewalls or things like that too. The URL, wave.webaim.org, does not work behind password protected sites, so the extension is the only thing that works for that. And it does not send information to that organization. All it is a tool that's provided in your browser for you. So that's why this one, it works behind a password protected site, but the other one doesn't. They also have a version in Firefox. That's not Firefox. It's a tool as well. Actually provided as a toolbar here instead of as a link on the side. And you can do the same kind of thing. You click on errors, features, and alerts, and it provides all of the links embedded in the page for where there may be issues. This one doesn't look as clean as the Chrome one. The Chrome one is more updated, so it's a little bit easier, in my opinion, to use. I do like, though, the caveat that they put at the top of this one. It says, Wave has detected no accessibility errors, but you still must check your page to make sure it is actually accessible. This is an important topic because there is no such thing as a full computer test for accessibility that can tell you yes or no, because accessibility is inherently about the individual's interaction with the technology, not a computer's interaction with technology. And if you think of a computer user of technology like Google, and the Google search engine, is in effect a deaf and blind user of technology. So that technology actually functions as a lot of folks who are blind do, having to look through the background, look through the code to find what are the things that I should be prioritizing in the algorithm for the search results, things like that. So sometimes if you've done any reading on accessibility, folks will say that web accessibility actually can improve your search engine optimization. That's debated, but certainly if you do things like have good alternative text and good heading structure, that actually can elevate your standing in a search if someone searches for words that are similar to your headings to find that. So I brought this up to show you an example of human checking. So what this tool can do a really good job of doing is tell you, yes, you have alternative text for your image. This is the alternative text. It can't tell you whether that's appropriate. I could have put garbled words in here and it still would have said, yes, you have alternative text. So at some point, we still have to go in and check and make sure that what we're doing is appropriate and is going to work. It can tell you you have a heading structure. It can't necessarily tell you that the words you've used for those headings are appropriate, things like that. So it still needs a human check to do some of these things. But hopefully this tool can help do some of that. So some of the things that I've talked about already that are important, I haven't actually used the word linearization, but linearization is really important because that's how assistive technology like screen readers work with content. They actually look at the code behind the visual representation of the page. So it's really important that your content linearizes well, that it falls into a line. And that's a really easy way to check your site using Wave. If you turn it on to the no styles, and it turns your site into the non-visual representation but just the text, that actually linearizes your page. And so if you're reading through that no styles version of the site and things seem out of place, then something's not right about the linearization of your page. Maybe something needs to be flipped as you're designing the site. But that's a good way to check. The keyboard access that I mentioned before, just using the tab key and going forward or backward can be a really useful tool to check and see if you can actually visually tell where you're at on a page and can get to everything on a page. If you use Mac, and it might not be active on these computers since these are Macs, you actually have to turn that feature on. It's not on by default. On a PC it is on by default, but it's really easy. I have instructions on how to do that on the accessibility website. And then content management systems are really important too. Even things like WordPress, if any of you use WordPress and have any blogs, those templates are really important. Those provide the framework to determine how accessible your site is going to be. And if those templates don't provide accessibility, then your site is inherently going to have some flaws in it too. So I tend to spend a lot more of my time working on template kinds of topics than I do on specific site, because that to me seems like the biggest impact, to try to make sure all of our templates are as accessible as possible. Any questions so far? It's a lot of content. It can be overwhelming. I know. So this is a list of website elements that I generally talk about that are important to focus on from an accessibility standpoint. All of these have their own standalone page on the accessibility site that you can learn more about. I'm not going to go through all of these because that can even add to the overwhelmingness of all of this, but I'm just going to focus on the ones that are bolded here. Headings, image accessibility, descriptive links, and tables. And then hopefully after that, we can get into any more specific questions you have. If you have questions about other elements or things that I don't talk about, happy to go into those if you bring those up too. But I thought these might be the biggest high-level kinds of things to focus on. So I mentioned headings a lot already. Headings are really, really important because they actually organize your page. It's the only way to actually provide structure to your site. So you should never use things like bold or outline or underline or font size to make something look like it stands out. You should actually use the built-in heading structure that's provided through the template. If you're in WordPress, this is what it looks like. If you're using Drupal, this is generally what it looks like unless you're using code directly. But there's this little box for paragraph, and when you open that, it has all of these predefined structure levels in it. So if you actually go in here and select heading level 1, it'll turn whatever text you have highlighted or whatever you type into that heading level 1. And it's actually useful too, because if you ever highlight any text on your site in here, it'll actually show you what it's coded as down here too. So it would actually say heading level 1 or H1. I forget what it actually says, but it does that. So I know over the years I've talked with a number of folks that tend to have they tend to want their headings to look a certain way, and so they don't want to follow these because they don't want it to be orange and 20-point font or something. They want it to look different than that. And I would say, sure, customization is great, but you should try to do that through the mechanisms that are provided through central web services. And you can actually change how those look. If you know a little bit more about coding and you go through the Drupal training, the website and all the information, you can actually go in to your own site and customize the look of headings. It takes some technical skills, but you can also ask them to help you do that if you wanted to customize your individual site. But you should always use headings. And you should always use them judiciously. I don't know if I say that on the following page, but headings are, since they're the only way to provide structure to a page, you shouldn't just provide a heading everywhere you want to have text stand out. You should provide it as a way to organize, kind of thinking of a research paper or a book where you have chapters. You have, in a research paper, you have your introduction, your methodology, your results, your limitations. So those are kind of how you would think of headings on a website, as kind of big content breaks and what the next bit of content is about. So if we think about it like an outline, this is just kind of a general look into how a heading structure would look on a website. Generally, you only have one heading level 1 per page, and it's the page title that's considered best practice. Then you have a first main section, and then subsections under that, and then maybe a second main section. But it depends on the template. So that's one of the reasons it's important to really understand what your template provides for you, so you can build off of that in an accessible way. And this is one of those areas where the toolbar can be really useful, or the Wave tool. Because if you go into a website, like this is built in Drupal, and I click on Wave, and I go in here and I look at my outline, so it's giving me the heading structure. I automatically know from this, the site name is a heading level 1. That's a template provided thing. So I know that there's already a heading level 1 on the page, so I build off of that. And then further down, the page title is always a heading level 2 using this template in Drupal. And I don't have any control over that either. I only have control over what's below that. So I automatically know I need to build everything off of a heading level 2. And then I can build my structure based on that. If I have 3 main sections, then I have 3 heading level 3s, and then sub-information under that, so on and so forth. And so here I have everything as a heading level 3 because everything is about alternative text images beyond that. But they even provide things like the menus all have some predefined headings. Like here, the site menu is a heading level 3 always too. So you build off of that if you're building a large menu and you have headings in your menu or anything beyond that. Any questions about headings? So that is, as I was saying when we were demonstrating screen readers, a much more consistent and becoming more prevalent way for folks to navigate, because you can actually get to the content you're trying to find a lot quicker. than just going from link to link to link. Sometimes you have sections that don't have links. So it's easier to go to a heading and say, oh, I really want to know about this particular topic, and then listen to that. And also, most screen readers, you can actually bring up lists of things, so I could actually use VoiceOver here and have it bring up a list of headings, and then I don't even have to look at the page or navigate through the page. I just view the list of headings and go right to the heading that I want from a list, and then just find that information. So spending the next few slides talking about how to make images accessible, which is called alternative text in web coding lingo. If you're using Drupal, this is the dialog box that comes up when you go to insert an image on the page. And you always want to put your alternative text in the image description box, and that's what provides that accessibility. And if you actually leave that blank, it's been a while since I've uploaded an image that way, but if you leave that blank, I believe when you go to insert an image, you get an error message that Central Web has put in that says you must put in an image description. So that's what provides access. The title field underneath it, that's not an accessibility related item. That's when you hover with your mouse over an image, you get that extra tooltip that pops up sometimes with images. That's there for that reason. It can provide more context to an image if you want for a sighted user or a mouse user, but it's not an accessibility related item. The best practice is generally not to have those be the exact same. You don't want to put your alternative text in a title. You actually, if you use a title, you want it to be different information that is for a sighted user of technology, not someone who is blind or using a screen reader. So it's really important when you're deciding what to write for that image description or that alternative text field, the content, the context of your image. Because what you're doing is, if you're thinking about someone who may be blind, someone who's using a screen reader to navigate, who may not be able to see the image, you want to provide the context for why you're using the image to that person. Just as someone who's visual, who can see that image, can make that meaning pretty quickly. Someone who's blind may not be able to understand why you're using an image, so you want to give that context. As I said earlier, you always want to avoid using a word like photo or graphic or describe what it is, because that's the screen reader is going to say that. If you provided an image description that said something like image of a camera, the screen reader would say photo image of the camera, and that's redundant information. It's not necessary. You always have to use an image description. If you don't use an image description, and you can, if you do leave it blank, if you ever use the HTML version of your site to code and you leave that, you can actually get away with not having an image description. But if you leave that blank, the screen reader will try to assume what the image description is, and usually that's through reading the file name of the image. And so if you have a file name that's just some random assortment of words and letters, it'll say image324.jpg or something, and that is really frustrating to folks too. So you always have to have something in there. I'm going to talk about different kinds of images too, and how this could be complicated. So simple images, just an image that you're using just for the intent, the very simple intent of providing information without anything more complex. So the example here is if you have a biography page or a staff list page, and you're using an image of someone, all the alternative text really should be is just the person's name. It doesn't need to be portrait of Angelo Gomez wearing a button shirt with a nice sunny blurry backlit frame. That might be important if you were using this for something like a photography 101 class or something where you were actually talking about the composition of photography. Then the alt text would probably be different, because that's the purpose you're using the image for, not necessarily to provide just information about somebody. So a decorative image. So I have an example here of one of the OSU brand icon images of a sun. If an image is just for decoration, it isn't meant to convey any meaning whatsoever to somebody, it's just visual interest, then the best practice is to use what's called a null alt text, which is just an empty alt text. You still provide an alt tag, you just leave it empty. What that does is it hides it from the screen reader, so if you were actually navigating on a page, it just skips over all the decorative images, which makes it easier to navigate the site. If you use Drupal, you can't do that. It doesn't let you do that. The background code doesn't. So you still have to put something in that image description field. So my advice then is just make it very simple, quick, because you want to let someone get through that really quickly. So in this image, it might just be sun or something like that, so that it just says image sun and goes beyond as quickly as possible. If you have an image with text, such as these two below, all you need to use is the text for the alternative text. So this would just be Daisy Farm Project. This one would just be bowling, and that's fine. That's consistent. That's the purpose that you're using that image for. If you have a linked image, you want to describe what clicking the link would do. So we don't see a lot of these anymore, but if you have a button icon or something like this, like on the homepage, we actually saw that with previous and next story. You don't want the alternative text to say button or something like that. You actually want it to say next page or previous page. You want to say what clicking it would do. It is important. The example I use on the right is the old Benny Beaver mascot. If that was a link to a page about the history of OSU mascots, that's what you'd want the alternative text to be. History of OSU mascots. And then they would say link history of OSU mascots instead of link 1950 Benny Beaver mascot, because that's not what clicking that link would do. And it actually, the screen reader changes what it says there. It says link graphic history of OSU mascots. So it provides both link and image. If you were actually using a linked image with text, say these were actually links to a site, then actually using the words on that image are still consistent. So here, if this was a link to the Daisy Farm Project, it would say link graphic Daisy Farm Project or link graphic bowling. So that's still consistent with what it would do, what clicking that link would do. And that's important too as we add more and more things like buttons on our pages to other links, or like a lot of our sites have sidebar buttons or other icons that provide links to various different things on our sites. Usually just the text on that is all that's needed. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. So I like to say complex images are very complex. We can have a long conversation about how to make complex images accessible, but the main point that I'll make is we still have to provide information somehow to someone. So if you have something like this old pie chart that I made of OSU undergrad enrollment by class standing, well, someone who's sighted can see that information, can make meaning of it, but someone who's blind or using a screen reader isn't going to be able to understand that. And you're going to provide an alt text for this image, but you don't want to provide an alt text that says everything. You don't want it to say image or graphic fall 2011 OSU undergrad enrollment by class standing, senior 30, junior 24, sophomore 22, freshman 24. Alt text is really meant to be a quick thing. It's not meant to be sentences or a paragraph long. It's really meant to be a few words long. So you want to provide that information in some other way to somebody. The easiest way to do it is to provide it in the text, is my best view on that. So perhaps if you provide this pie chart on the page, you can also provide a list or a paragraph that describes that information somewhere else. If you have something like this that might actually be a fairly simple complex image, maybe you think about, is there another way that I present this information so that I don't have to use an image? Maybe I do actually provide a list on a page instead of an image so that everyone has access to it. If you have something really complex, if you have something like an image of a table or something that you've taken, maybe you can actually go through and code it as a table on your site instead of using an image of a table, and then that would provide access to it. So it's a very hard topic though, because we have a lot of complex images, especially as we get into some of the academic side of the university. I saw an example of this yesterday that I thought might be interesting to share. Nope, that's not what I was trying to do. So if you go to the About page, off of the home page, there's a big map here that shows locations around Oregon that we have campuses or some sort of endeavor, like Hatfield and Newport and OSU Cascades and Bend and the Food Innovation Center in Portland and the Seafood Lab in Astoria. So how do you make this accessible? Because this is an image, so someone's not going to be able to get all that meaning. Well, I think they've actually done a fairly good job. Right above that, in their paragraph, they actually talk about Hatfield Marine Sciences Center in Newport, OSU Cascades and Bend. So it provides some of that information still that's in the image to someone else. It doesn't say the Seafood Lab, and it doesn't say the Food Innovation Center right here, but those are probably also in the extension in the Ag Experiment Station site. But maybe that's something that they could just add on to this that wouldn't add much more than finishing out this third line here to that. And it's providing that information in another way that someone can access. And I thought that was interesting. I'd never seen that until yesterday. One last slide on images here. CAPTCHAs, evil CAPTCHAs. So how many of you have had a difficult time entering a CAPTCHA and have failed it yourself? I do all the time. Even the visual component to it. So these are 3 different CAPTCHAs that I have found on OSU websites. These are all from current OSU websites. Does anything stand out about them? They're all a little different. Think about accessibility. What stands out about accessibility that might be different?
Blurry numbers in the top picture.
Yeah, blurry numbers.
You have to be able to see them.
Have to be able to see them.
It's
Certainly.
also the only one that has like an audio icon or audio option.
It has an audio option on the top. Good, yeah. So certainly, a lot of folks struggle with reading the blurry letters on something like that on the top image here. So what they've done is provide an audio version. This reCAPTCHA, which is pretty popular, it's probably the most popular version of CAPTCHA. So if you're someone who's blind, screen reader user, or someone who has a hard time reading those blurry letters, you can actually listen to the audio. And then what it does is it provides garbled audio that you're supposed to pick out some letters and some numbers from and then type those into the box. I don't know if I've ever successfully completed one of those audio ones, but I encourage you the next time you see a CAPTCHA that's like that, listen to the audio and try to make meaning of it. Because it really, to me, it sounds like a ghost. It's like, ooh, 1, 2. And it's like really weird background. And so think about the challenges that might present to some of our population and how difficult that would be. With that said, though, the top version is more accessible than the middle version because the middle version has no audio component. So if you're someone who has a visual disability or someone who's blind and you encounter this with a screen reader, there is no possible way for you to get past this because this is an image that doesn't have any alternative text on purpose. That's the purpose of it, is to not have alternative text, to be inaccessible so that a spam bot doesn't get past it. So yeah, so if this is on a really important page, maybe something like registering for classes, you have to enter a CAPTCHA, I don't know why we would do that, or buy a ticket to a show or something, then someone who's blind is never going to be able to buy a ticket on that website, which is very inaccessible. This one on the bottom, this is actually off of my website, the Office of Equity and Inclusion website. So this is actually maybe the last couple of years. A new version of a CAPTCHA that requires something different than reading and typing in letters. It's a math question that you have to get right to get past it. Does anything stand out about that? Still solvable by a bot, potentially. It is actually still potentially solvable by a bot, although a lot of bots are pretty stupid and don't actually know how to do math. They just go in and enter random text and then submit to try to get spam put in. But a lot of these kinds of CAPTCHAs actually, they test the speed at which something is entered. And so if something is entered in a split second, they know it's a computer. If it takes someone a second or two to enter something and get it right, then they're more likely to be a human. And so it can block that. It is conceivably, it's still argued that it's the kind of CAPTCHA that lets the most spam pass, because bots will eventually get smart enough to figure it out. But bots have gotten smart enough to figure out all of these. Bots are smart enough to actually read an image and use OCR, optimal character recognition, figure it out, put that in the box and get past it. So we've actually been using this on our website, and this is provided through Drupal. You can do this through Drupal. We've been using this for a couple of years now, and we get very little spam through our email. This is to send us an email. So it's not a perfect solution. If you read about it online, if you did any Googling, you would find people saying stay away from math or from something like that. But I think it's an interesting option to consider. Certainly, you always want to avoid this one that's provided, I think, through Drupal or some other format as well. So you always want to use the top one or something like this math one at the bottom that provides access to someone who's blind. There's other ways to do spam filtering, and we don't need to get into all of it, but certainly even having things like a password protected site, like you have to use your own id to get in to submit something, is even much better than these, because a bot won't be able to get past that at all. So something simple like that is better in my opinion. We should try to avoid CAPTCHAs whenever we can. Descriptive links. So this is really about how you write link text. And if you think back to how a screen reader functions and how if you're using your keyboard only, you go from link to link. If you're navigating by links, all the context you get is the words that you use for your links. So you want your links to be as descriptive as possible. You don't want to use words like click here or read more. Something like that is not descriptive. So you just come across that by itself. It doesn't make any sense. And the example here at the bottom is the screen reader would read the link text. So it would either say link click here or link disability access services. Sometimes you provide a URL as a link instead of actually words. And it will actually try to make meaning of it. It'll try to read words where it can make sense of the words. So here it would say link http://ds.oregonstate.edu/home. So it would figure out that Oregon State is 2 words from there. You can use these as link text when you need to. If you think that you have a site that is going to get printed out or something, or you're going to use it as something that folks can print, then certainly sometimes you need to use that so that folks know where to go. But always avoid things like click here or read more in any of your links. And I like to say too, to me it seems like the words that you should use as your link are always in your text somewhere anyway. You just have to write a sentence and then figure out what words do you want to make the link. Instead of writing the sentence like you're going to provide a, hey, go here at the end or something. Okay, tables. So we're going to talk about 2 kinds of tables. two kinds of tables exist in web development: a linear table, or a layout table, and a data table. In a data table, exactly as it sounds, you're providing data, numbers, some organization to your table. A layout table is something that you're just using to provide some format or structure to a page. You want to make something fit a certain way, you want to make it spaced a certain way, you can use a table, hide the borders, and it'll look exactly as you want it to look. So I'm going to talk about data tables first. In a data table, can be very accessible based on a few coding techniques. So if you think about the way that most tables are read, you go left to right, top to bottom. You read across a row of headers and maybe a column of headers. And if you think about how that we were using the concept of linearization earlier, so the screen reader will actually linearize the table to provide the context for it. So the way this table would read with no structure to it whatsoever is it would go seed cost, Monsanto, Pioneer, DeKalb, corn, $100 acre, $90 acre, $80 acre, soybean, and so on. So it actually takes and reads cell by cell in the table. So if you can't provide, or you don't know how to provide any of the coding for your table behind it, then maybe if you're having something as simple as that, you just provide it as a list, because lists are linear by nature and provide really good access. There is a way in Drupal to lay out data tables to be accessible. There's some techniques on the accessibility website for doing that. You actually do have to go in as you're inputting a table into some more fields than just using the body content that you can see. There's actually a way to go through and code a cell as a heading, which you should be doing in Drupal, but I didn't want to go through all of that here. There's also a way to add something that's called caption in Drupal using another technique. It acts as like a title for your table. It actually physically connects that title to your table versus being some text that's just before your table that's not actually tied to it. If you were to code this with headings or any data table with headings, such as the top row or the first column, the screen reader will actually give you more data. So you'll be reading across and it'll actually say, so say I'm navigating through this bottom row right here and I'm going across. The screen reader would say seed cost soybean, Monsanto $1.60 acre, Pioneer $1.65, DeKalb $1.70. So the screen reader will actually read the header before it reads the cell. So it'll give you more context. So more likely, we're going to have tables for layout. So I've used some of my former colleagues from Disability Access Services that no longer work in that office to talk about layout tables. So say I have a biography page and I want to lay out staff information on a site. And this is the way I do it. Well, think about linearization. How would that work for this? Not very well. So reading left to right, top to bottom, the screen reader would read the alternative text for the images, then it would read their names, then it would read the titles. So you would hear something like 541-737-4098 and not necessarily know that that was Jennifer's number. You might think it was someone else's number. So it doesn't linearize well. And you can't put headings because this isn't a data table. So you can't actually provide that physical connection. So the way to code layout tables to make them accessible is to think about linearization. How do you actually provide that in a linear way so that when the table breaks, if you go into your wave tool and turn the styles off, it'll actually take the table and put it into a line. This would fall out into a line very well because it would be image, name, title, so on and so forth. Like that. It would linearize very well. Does that make sense? Oh, so a lot of the stuff we've talked about also applies to documents like PDFs, Word documents, things like that. You should always use the built-in styles on those as well. Just like heading structure is built into Drupal and WordPress, it's built into Word documents. If you convert Word documents to PDFs, as long as your Word document has been built using those styles, you put in alt text for your images, which can be done in Word, can be done in PDF. All of those will be converted over to the PDF and then try to maintain some accessibility with it. So there's lots of great information about that. I have some on the accessibility website that links to other sources of really great, well-developed information. With multimedia, we're really talking about captions, as I talked about a long time ago. There's actually places that can provide that for you if you don't feel like you have the budget to provide captioning all the time. There are some services that you could look into. There's a cloud-based service called Amara, A-M-A-R-A, that actually what you do is you put a video out through the cloud and it gets captioned by whomever wants to watch it. They all go to this site, agree to watch it and they caption your video for you. Not necessarily 100% perfect, but it can be free and it can take some time, but it's a really good tool. There's actually a number of universities that use that as their captioning tool Western Oregon uses it, and they actually get students on campus to sign up to do the captioning for them as volunteer hours, and then give those folks civic engagement credit for that. Disability Access Services does captioning all the time. If you haven't ever had a conversation with them about captioning, it is a fairly low-cost solution. Of course, it depends on the length of the video and how complex it is, but they do provide captioning for a very low cost. And they're actually, I've been participating with Alex and Disability Access Services to investigate a technology solution for captioning so that we can provide more captioning on campus. And so he's putting out a request for proposals from software vendors that could provide some software quick turnaround vendor provided captioning instead of in-house like DAS does. And so he's actually trying to find the lowest cost, best quality services. So there could be a potential within the next year or so that if he could get enough offices to collaborate, that we could get quite a large pool of resources to provide lower cost captioning than DAS actually provides. And so he's been reaching out to places where he knows create a lot of videos, like eCampus and Academic Technologies folks, media services folks, about that. But if you do create a lot of videos for your units, that might be something worth checking in with Alex about. Can you get in on that service? He's going to start with a trial run. You pay by the hour for a lot of these services, so the more hours you buy ahead of time, the cheaper it can be. So I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, he's going to try to go in and set up a temporary demo account with like 10,000 hours worth of captioning services so that we can test it and find the best solutions for that. You can also caption your own videos too. There's actually, YouTube has gotten a lot better over the years at having easy to use captioning tools. You can actually go in and caption your own videos in YouTube, and the way that it works now is you start to type in your transcript or your text for your captions, the video automatically pauses. It didn't used to do that, so you used to have to like go back half a minute every time you'd enter some text. But it's a lot more creative at that now. I would say you should never rely on the automated captioning that YouTube has. If you've ever if you've ever read the automated captions as you listen to a video, they can be pretty horrendous, pretty bad. I forget, I was trying to demo someone's site yesterday to try to get some information. Whose site was I on? I might have been on RecSport's website. See if I can use a search and get it quick. Yeah, I want to play this. It might have been in this one. So these are automated captions.
Welcome to recreational sports at Oregon State University. My name is Allie Cascaro, and I'm the membership coordinator. My purpose is to care for you and connect you with the wellness resources you want and need.
So it got some of the words right, but it got most of them wrong. And so I've only seen, like, this is a bad message for something to be out as an official university video. And I've seen really ridiculous captions that say things really like, come do cocaine with me or something, because it's trying to read the language and then put it on the audio, put it on underneath the audio. So I wouldn't rely on those, or if you do rely on them, at least check them before you put your video out there for that, so you don't get something that's pretty bad. The automated captions, I have seen them work if you have a highly produced video that has really good sound and really good sound barriers. So if it's someone like, if it's our media services or our university relations and marketing folks that actually set up really nice professional systems, I've seen some of those work well. But for most of us, that's not going to work as a good solution. Talked about those already, and I'm happy to provide those resources. So I thought it'd be, hopefully we have 20 minutes left or so, would be good to answer any questions you have, or if you want to look at your site and have me come around and sit down and talk through it, that'd be a good opportunity to do that. Does anyone have any big questions?
Could you pop up the last slide?
Yeah, with resources. Certainly. Web accessibility in mind, the same organization that has the Wave tool, has an immense amount of information on their website as well about this. So certainly I've provided a link here to their captioning website where you can learn about captioning, but if you go to their site, you can search for almost anything you're curious about and they'll have some resources about it.
Are these resources on your accessibility
They're all on the
website?
accessibility site, yeah.
One area you skipped over
Yeah.
that 6 years ago when you talked to us, you covered a little bit was the contrast for print media.
Uh-huh.
It seems like you gave a resource where you can actually get that checked. And over the years, I've lost where that resource was.
I actually have that tool right here. So we go to,
Through your website?
yeah, so actually if you go, I'll show you where you can find out more of the resources. So on the accessibility website, my navigation is just ridiculously long. But there is a whole section on web accessibility that has all of these elements on there. And if you go to color, at the bottom of every page, I have resources. So these are a lot of different tools that exist that can help you check things like color contrast. I use this one the most, the Paciello group, color contrast analyzer. They have a great tool. And I actually, I have it right here as a Firefox add-on. No, that's ColorZilla. I have it on my desktop.
Can you demonstrate that for us?
Yeah, this one's a little...
It works well for web stuff, but
Yeah.
what about for print?
This one's a little different. This one I don't have the Paciello group on my laptop here. But what I like about this particular tool, the Paciello one, is that it is a piece of software that you download and install on your computer, so it works with anything. So you don't have to just use it on a website, and it works very similar to the Photoshop eyedropper to go pick color. So what you do is you take the eyedropper, you go and pick a color, and then you pick the background color next to it, and it'll analyze and tell you is there enough contrast for that. There's other tools like this. If this tool still is functional, the NC State Accessibility Evaluator, you can actually input like 6 or 7 different colors, and it'll show you the palette in which colors are have enough contrast against each other. So it'll tell you avoid using these 2 colors right next to each other, but you can use these other colors next to each other, which is really useful if you think about all the colors that we have for our brand. We have 8 or so different colors, and they don't all have contrast with each other. Most of them are actually fairly similar in color, so you want to be very judicious in what you use. And we actually, hardly anyone noticed it, but maybe 2 years ago or so, we actually tweaked the OSU orange color because it was too light. It didn't have contrast with white, and it didn't have enough contrast with black. So we were kind of in this zone where our color just didn't work with anything. So what Interactive Communications actually did is they reddened it just a few shades, and that provided enough contrast to meet the standards that exist for that. So it's something that not many folks noticed, but like the tag here just darkened just a little bit to provide enough contrast. And now every template has that same orange on it. It's a little different than it was a few years ago. So that's a tool. I wish I had downloaded on my computer here, but let me see if I actually...
You know, Kent, in thinking about this, I think what happens sometimes too is we get it okay on the web, we get it okay in what it looks like on the computer screen, and then when it prints, it's still hard to read because of the colors, and I don't know what we can do about that other than have a test print.
I do have it.
Well, some of the worst is having orange text on a black background.
Yeah.
Or black text on an orange background.
Yeah.
We do that all the time.
We do. Yeah, we have very bad colors
Yeah.
that go against each other. So I know I made a comment when the mammoth bones came out that maybe it was time to revisit our mascot and our color. That's sacrilege around here, because orange is one of the worst colors to use from a contrast standpoint because it's right in the middle, and so it doesn't work with. It works with very, very little. It doesn't even work with gray very well. So on things like my site, I've actually gone in and make sure that the background is always white in these different sections so that it has enough contrast. And I actually have an example here of something like this does not have enough contrast, this is okay, it meets standards, this is the best. Black on white is the best, anywhere you go. So these tools can help you do some of that math. And yeah, I have a few slides about that, but I didn't show those this time.
Well, it was mainly just that resource link that I did again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Passio replace. I actually have those slides in here. Yeah. So there's really 2 points. One is you can't use color to convey meaning. So if you use something like on a form here, you can't use red to identify what's required by itself. You have to use multiple methods, otherwise someone who's colorblind won't be able to tell the difference between these two. But this image on the right could have ID number is required with an asterisk and red. It could do both because it's not using color alone. And then the second one here has this tool and the required contrast ratio. This does not have enough contrast. This does. So you can even see some of the differences here. Another tool that I like to use with some of our capital planning and development folks who do construction and mapping is this website called VizCheck. It's vizcheck.org. You can actually upload images and it'll show you what those images look like from different forms of color blindness. And there are multiple different forms of color blindness. Of course, the most common is red-green. But it's really useful if you have something where you are using color to convey meaning, to be able to determine, is the color you're using, does it still have enough contrast using the different forms of color blindness? And so if you're thinking about things like a campus map that has things like bus routes or parking lots that are coded by color, that could be a tool to help folks understand if it still has enough contrast to distinguish this is different from this in different areas. Other questions?
So if we're checking websites, does it matter what browser we're using? Is there one browser that works better or is recommended?
The easiest answer is use one of the ones that's most popular. Use like Chrome or Firefox or Safari, although Safari is much less used than those two. There are differences from every browser. There are differences from every screen reader. So your site could be completely accessible on Chrome using JAWS, but it not be fully accessible using Safari and VoiceOver. That's not something you can control, so that's not something that we have the ability to affect. I usually, when I do testing, I usually use a PC and Firefox, and then I use a Mac and Safari. And so I do multiple different tests for that. For the most part, the things that I've talked about are consistent from browser to browser, but the browsers do implement things slightly differently. If you go in and you use your tab key in Safari or in Chrome, I believe the most current version of Chrome automatically gives you a focus indicator, regardless of anything. So you just know where you're at without having to have any specific coding. But that's not consistent from browser to browser. I don't think Safari does that. So there are subtle differences.
And then, not necessarily related to accessibility, but like I have an iPhone, so it uses Safari. What do Androids use? Is there a default?
I'm not sure. I use an iPhone too. Yeah, I think there are probably multiple options on Android, so it's personalized. Opera, I know folks use Opera. Yeah, I would assume they use others too. And to me, it's fascinating that something like an iPhone is a fully accessible device. And Androids are getting better too. They used to not be as accessible. But with VoiceOver on this iPhone, I could actually turn on VoiceOver and demonstrate how to use my entire iPhone without looking at it. and still being able to touch the screen and find the different icons and navigate around. So just because something like this doesn't look accessible, doesn't mean it's not. Yeah.
And for making sure that our websites or whatnot are accessible on mobile devices, is there also information on your website, or is that more like the Drupal folks?
Yeah, it's more in the templates and how the templates work, and those have gotten better. But the same ideas that I've talked about here apply broadly to mobile and desktop, laptop operating systems, and they're designed to work forward-thinking too. So browsers try to maintain consistency with these standards, and the way that the standards have been written are trying to future-proof for new technologies too. So, because it is all about the background. It's all, like I said, it's about the code, not about the visual representation. So the visual representation can change, but the code will still be the same for the most part.
Will you share the PowerPoint with us so that we can put it on our website?
And if you know anything about code and you're interested in more about that, I can get into those details one-on-one too. Because when I do web reviews, I actually look at the code more than anything else. And I do it a lot for Central Web, where I'll go in and I'll take a snippet of code, provide it in a report, and say, this is the code. Here's how it can be tweaked to make it a little bit more accessible, and a few things that could be changed. So that is, if you know and if you work in Drupal using HTML, you can do some things a little bit better, a little bit differently than here. So, yeah.
So the new Drupal will be better than the old Drupal?
Yes, and yeah. And if you know anything about coding, you turn on the HTML. If you go, I have to go to the. I think it's. You can't really see it, but there's a little HTML icon right there. And that flips it to being the code versus the visual representation. Mm-hmm. So yeah. To me, after having done this for so long, it's easier to work with the code than it is to work with the visual representation. So sometimes it's just easier to go into that and look for the exact snippet of code, move it around, change some of the things in it. So yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
If you have anything about your own site that you want me to look at, I'm happy to stick around and talk through those too.
Just trying to tab through, I found to be interesting and difficult.
And go to a regular non-university site. Let me go to and go like the Oregonian. See what the Oregonian's like.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so you can't see anything.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can see, depending on the browser you're using, you can see what the URL is.
Right.
But I'm stuck
What is
there.
that? Yeah.
I'm stuck somewhere. And I can't get through it. So, yeah. Or we could go look at, I think it's Oregon. But there's a link. Wait. Just to pick on them.
Yeah. Well, but I see the URL.
So you can see, so actually there's a really good thing first. So the first thing you find when you tab is it provides you a link that's hidden. It says jump to content. This is a skip navigation link. And what this actually probably does is skip over all of this stuff and goes right down to the whatever the main section probably below the fold here is for the site. And so you can actually, you can see it's got the dotted box, which is okay. My preference would be if it looked the same, so if it actually turned yellow when you tabbed would be better than if it was this dotted box, because it makes it more visible. So you can see there's differences between how a keyboard user uses it versus how a mouse user sees the site.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a very easy thing to change. It would take me 2 seconds in the code to change that. That's a little bit better, but even still, it could be yellow. Yeah, that's nice. Whereas if you go to, it's been a while since I've done it, so we'll see if it's good. You can see ours has that nice big box and it turns yellow or orange. And you can see where you're at right here, which treats it the exact same as if you were using a mouse, and it turns it orange. So makes it more visible, more present. So your site should look like that. It should change the exact same as it does for a mouse user. In most cases. Good. Well, thank you.
Yay.